Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this July 15, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Jeremy Bowen has our opening report tonight on Israel, which will continue and intensify airstrikes on Gaza after a ceasefire proposed by Egypt failed, having been rejected by the military wing of Hamas.
By the evening, it was business as usual over Gaza. Hamas and the small armed groups had never stopped firing at Israel. Some missiles were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. One that got through caused the first Israeli death of the conflict. Other rockets fell short, dropping back into Palestinian territory. Israeli drones never left the sky over Gaza, patrolling constantly. And the Israelis, as they've done every day, carried out strikes as Gazans broke their Ramadan fast at sunset. In Israel, rockets caused some damage, disruption, casualties, and most of all, fear. It was never a proper ceasefire. Only the Israelis accepted it and said they'd hold their fire if Hamas did. But that didn't happen. Israelis kept running for cover.
If Hamas rejects the Egyptian proposal and the rocket fire from Gaza does not cease, and that appears to be the case now, we are prepared to continue and intensify our operation to protect our people. And for this, we expect full support from the responsible members of the international community.
Not long after he spoke, back in Gaza, Israel resumed its warnings about bombing, as it did with this house a few days ago, first by phone and then with a small missile. Just over 4 minutes later came the main strike. Hamas is prepared for more of this till Israel accepts its ceasefire conditions, including lifting Gaza's siege, the release of some prisoners, and the end to all Israeli attacks. The owner of the wrecked house, who escaped in time with his family, denied claims that it was bombed because 4 of his sons were Hamas fighters.
We say, God willing, there will be a ceasefire. But it's not just about stopping the rockets. It has to respect the conditions laid down by the resistance.
Israel destroyed this house on the edge of Gaza City this afternoon. Whether or not fighters also lived here, so did children who've lost their home. The owner was warned and escaped in time with his family. He said it was collective punishment. There wasn't much left to salvage. Unless Israel invades and reoccupies all of the Gaza Strip, which it's not going to do, the chances are that this will end with a ceasefire. It'll be temporary. Long term, the only solution is a settlement of getting on for 70 years of conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And at the moment, there is no chance of that happening. Hamas said they learnt the details of the failed ceasefire plan from journalists. Diplomats will try harder now for a deal before this fight gets any more deadly. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Gaza.
Friends, a couple of things related to this video report you just saw that'll be offset in the next video is there's some strong evidence that Hamas did not just simply get the information from the media. You'll hear that in this next video. Let me just give you a couple of notes I have here. First, though, Palestinian officials say Israel raids have now killed 194 people. Earlier today, Israel reported its first fatality. And in this next video report, Israel's spokesman will let us know how Hamas threw away the chance of a ceasefire. Israel had earlier accepted an Egyptian truce proposal. However, it was, as you heard in this last video, it was rejected by the armed wing of Hamas, which controls Gaza. Hamas had nearly 7 hours to get their act together, and the truth is, as you'll hear the Israeli spokesman Mark Regev say, I want you to listen for this during this report, friends. Mark will say Hamas had nearly 7 hours to get their act together, and the truth is they rejected the ceasefire proposal. Here in this video, Mark Regev, speaking to Lys Doucette, he added, you have in Gaza, listen for this, he'll say, you have in Gaza a leadership that doesn't care about the people of Gaza, who threw away this morning a chance for a ceasefire.
This morning, first thing, the Israeli Security Cabinet met and after discussion accepted the Egyptian proposal. That proposal was supported by the Arab League and the Palestinian government of President Mahmoud Abbas. Hamas has rejected it. It has rejected it both in word and in deed. From 9 o'clock this morning, when all Israeli operations in Gaza ceased, there were scores of rockets fired at Israel, and we have now just resumed our offensive operations. In other words, Hamas had nearly 7 hours to get their act together, and the truth is they rejected this ceasefire proposal.
We've been hearing from Hamas spokesman Mark Regev. They didn't even get an offer. They heard about it through the media, and as you can appreciate, they have to see the deal first.
Let's be clear. I think they're being disingenuous. They didn't hear about it. We all heard about it last night at 10 o'clock. And I heard your interview previously with the Egyptian spokesperson who confirmed that he was in contact with all the relevant parties to this. I think Hamas is playing games. I think Hamas is trying to hide what is the truth. And that is, Hamas is a very radical and extreme organization committed to violence. It doesn't care how much suffering it brings along to the people of Gaza. It's committed to shooting these rockets into Israel to try to kill our people. And they won't stop. And it appears that we'll have to continue to take steps to prevent them from doing so.
But would Israel consider, as part of a ceasefire deal, the lifting of the restrictions that even the United Nations aid agencies here say have to be eased if there is to be a sustained solution? This is what we're hearing from all the Gazans we speak to here in the Gaza Strip.
First of all, there was, after the previous round of fighting, a year and a half ago, there was an understanding reached also through Egypt in which Hamas would cease all hostile fire to Israel, and there would be in parallel an easing of the sanctions and of the restrictions. The trouble was that Hamas kept on firing those rockets. And the first and foremost basis for any change is an end to violence. You cannot have a normal relationship with the Gaza Strip if Gaza is firing rockets at you. And the truth is, under Hamas control, Hamas has an atrocious relationship not just with us, but with its other land neighbor, Egypt. And the reason is clear. You have in Gaza a leadership that doesn't care about the people of Gaza, who threw away this morning a chance for a ceasefire.
Friends, I think Mark Regev handled himself as the spokesman for Israel very well there in bringing out the real truth about what's going on and the real truth about what Hamas really is doing. In spite of what they say in the news, that even had the news reporter believing Hamas hadn't heard about this ceasefire. And as Mark Regev said, oh, come on. Everybody heard about it. Hamas is doing everything it can to elicit the sympathies of the international community against Israel while it lobes rockets, because missiles are guided. What they're lobing off into Israel are just rockets that have no missile guidance system on them at all. They just shoot them off in the direction of Israel, and whoever might get hit by them that the Iron Dome might miss. And of course, the Iron Dome cannot handle the barrage of rockets that Hamas is sending off into Israel. They'll just hit whomever they hit, women, children, whatever. But Israel, different from what the people in Gaza are doing, wisely avoid attack. They be on guard and ready to move away. And the military in Gaza, Hamas, they use their own civilian people as human shields. I mean, that's obvious, evidenced by news report after news report. Thank you very much, Mark Regev, for an outstanding revealing of the truth. Friends, in this next story, very interesting story about a new military jet that the name of which, I'll tell you in just a moment, is almost biblical. And I have to ask this question. Is it just coincidence that this newest military jet, which went from the drawing board to its first flight in only 23 months, has been named the Scorpion? I'll have some scriptures that possibly relate to that from Revelation right after we see this video that explains how the American or U.S.-based Textron Airland says they've built a low-cost aircraft that fills a gap in the military market. But as my head notes say, as yet no customer has placed an order for the $20 million, 12 million pound Scorpion. And they're about to show it off at the Farnborough Airshow. Nigel Cassidy has this report, and then I'll be back with the scriptures from Revelation related to military weaponry that is described in the Bible by the Apostle John from the island where he was on at Patmos, as he describes some of the military weaponry as a scorpion. But let's see this report with Nigel Cassidy.
On its way to the Farnborough Airshow, a military jet for the buyer on a budget. The Scorpion is a strike and reconnaissance plane designed in months using mainly off-the-shelf parts. It was developed in record time because its designers went ahead without the usual government contracts specifying every single feature. The makers of the Scorpion think there's a gap in the market between the cheaper trainer aircraft and your full-blooded F-35 strike fighter type planes, which at $120 million a go are really expensive. So they've produced this one from drawing board to its actual flight in less than 2 years. And they've done that by ignoring your typical military procurement process. They've taken all the decisions themselves about what it'll be like, and most of the parts, like the ejector seats, the engine, come off the peg. That's kind of reduced the cost and the whole time of producing this plane. All they need now are some buyers.
I think there's a market for a couple thousand of these aircraft. Many countries need to both develop their pilots in training. They have requirements to be able to do that kind of surveillance mode, but they also have the ability to interdict and attack when necessary. And so this aircraft was designed to be able to satisfy a range of those sorts of missions, and to do it in a very affordable way in terms of both the acquisition of the aircraft and the maintenance and support of the aircraft. Obviously, the fuselage, the wings, this is an all-composite structure, and that was designed clean slate for the program because that was really the uniqueness of what we were trying to create in terms of the mission for this aircraft. The process that we're following here, while arguably certainly quite different than a conventional military development process, is very much quite like what we do all the time in the commercial world.
Textron's bet a tidy sum on the Scorpion, but it did make it to Farnborough in 2 years, unlike the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which hasn't arrived yet because of engine trouble. Nigel Cassidy, BBC News, Farnborough.
Well, friends, there was a man whom God raised up to warn people around the world, and especially the people of the nations of Israel, about events in the end time, men to whom God gave an extreme amount of wisdom over a great number of years, so that the man was able to observe and tell us that when men and nations develop or purchase weapons, they always wind up using them. You know, we've been seeing stories about Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is known to have at least 10,000 rockets. They've launched a little more than 1,000 of those now. That means they've got at least 9,000 more to go, and that's the known rocket supply they have. And before this is all over, perhaps they're going to try to use up the 9,000 before they agree to any ceasefire. Oh, well, hey, we're out of weapons, guys. Well, let's get that ceasefire in effect now. Well, hopefully Hamas is going to learn a good lesson. Hopefully Israel will really spank them good to hopefully help them learn a lesson. You know, really though, friends, I mean, all the speculation about how to handle this or deal with this is not going to resolve the conflict that goes back more than just 70 years ago. This conflict goes back to the time shortly after Ishmael was born of Abraham's loins, to by and through his wife's handmaid named Hagar, who had a son named Ishmael, who became the father of basically largely the Arab people under 12 dukes or chiefs that God told Hagar and his son Ishmael that God would bless the offspring of Ishmael, and his offspring would develop into 12 dukes and produce a lot of people. Now, not the number of people so numberless as God blessed the son of Abraham via his wife Sarah and their son Isaac, who was the son of promise. But unfortunately, the Arabs, they've got this book called the Quran, and the Quran took a lot of truths of the Bible and they sprinkled them in there, but they took the story about Abraham taking his son Isaac up to the mountain at God's instruction to Abraham, and they switched it to say that God had Abraham take Ishmael up to the mountain. They put a bold-faced lie in the Quran. Now, yes, I've heard from some of you who are of Arab extraction and who follow the Quran, and, oh, you tell me that this book, the Holy Word of God, is a lie. But your book is true. Well, this book has things in it that proves itself. It has prophecies and things in here that no man could cause to happen when he says certain places can't be occupied, etc. And you can prove this book. This is the holy word of God, and it tells it the way it really happened. God had Abraham take his legitimate son, Isaac, up on the mountain. God rewarded Abraham and his son for the willingness to the sacrifice, which once God saw Abraham would obey, he said, "Hold it, Abraham, now I know that you will obey me, and I got a ram over here in the bush. Use that instead of your son." The test on Abraham was Abraham believed that God, when God said, "I'll make a great people so numberless, you can't even count," as if you could count the sand on the seashore, the grains of sand on the seashore, you would know how many people would be your offspring. Or if you could count all the stars of heaven, you would know the number of your offspring. But God was saying, your offspring will be numberless, Abraham, through Isaac. And Ishmael and his mom Hagar and their offspring, of course, became very jealous because they claim, descendancy from Abraham. And they, in fact, are descendants of Abraham. But that goes all the way back. That's thousands of years ago, not just a few decades, not just 7 decades ago, 70 years ago. We got to go back thousands of years to what is the basic rudiment, seed of the hostility that primarily Ishmael has against Isaac. Isaac got the blessing. And at this moment in time, Isaac's son Judah is possessing that land in the Middle East where Jerusalem is, that was never that greatly desired until the Jewish people got in there again after the captivity, and then Satan stirred up a situation where everybody, including the Pope and the Vatican, going back years ago at the time when the Pope had the Vatican had people help the Arabs write the Quran and put Muhammad up as a prophet and put the financial support up to the Arab generals to supply weaponry to go in and kill the Jews in Jerusalem and others there who called themselves Christians, except those who were part of the Roman Catholic faith. The deal with the Arabs they were to be protected. But the further deal was that the Arabs were to turn over Jerusalem to the Vatican. But they decided no, instead they'd build a Dome of the Rock there, claim that for themselves, and told the Pope to go jump in the lake, more or less, And then the Crusades started because the Vatican said, they're putting us down as infidels now and mistreating us and didn't keep their word with us, and so crusade time. And Ottoman the Great pulled a surprise on some of them in Constantinople there at one point in the history of all this. But friends, I told you we'd go to Revelation 9 related to that term scorpion. And thankfully, even though while I was talking with you, I was kind of ad-libbing, trying to figure out what am I going to do. My video player that I even have my slides from the Bible on crashed. But while I was talking to you, I'm amazed. I've never seen it do this before. It resolved itself, thankfully. So let's go to a few verses in Revelation that speak about scorpion. There's not too many places in the Bible that mentions a scorpion. Well, that mentions it in this way. There may be 11 verses in all that mention a scorpion. A few of them here are in Revelation 9. Let me grab my Bible. I'll put the slides on the screen full for you as I read to you from Revelation 9. We're going to read 11 verses, beginning in verse 1 and going through verse 11. Because they named that jet Scorpion. And I have another question. I ask you one question, about that thing having been built from drawing board to final production in 23 months, as the news anchor said there, news reporter, a little less than 2 years. Is there some relevance to that Scorpion jet having been produced so quickly that it may be a cue to what God's getting ready to allow to happen pretty soon with the events in prophecy, with the next major event in prophecy being the fifth seal? Let me bring this forward. The fifth seal of Revelation being the Great Tribulation, a time when Europe will be remapped or redistributed. The United Europe, the United States of Europe that's forming through the EU, they'll remap or kick out, or however they'll do it. It'll eventually wind up so you can clearly see that the composure of the United States of Europe that's coming in a very federated way will be comprised of 10 regions or nation states, however they do it, from the east, 5 from the east and 5 from the west, totaling 10. Just as the prophecy in Daniel 2 pictures the 2 feet on the 2 legs, 5 toes of miry clay and 5 of iron, which tells us this relationship, this union, they're not going to get along, but for a short space of time they're going to give their power to a new emperor of a revived Holy Roman Empire. He'll be most likely coronated in Frankfurt, Germany, where the other emperors of the Holy Roman Empire were coronated. And as I've mentioned before, the coronation hall, the Emperor's Hall in Frankfurt, Germany, was blown up by the Allies toward the end of World War II But the good old United States, through the Marshall Plan, provided the money, the goods, the construction people, the architects, to redesign that, to put together the architectural plans that were based on the original design of that building and using more modern, more expensive, fancy building construction. They rebuilt for the Germans the Emperor's Hall, put all the statues and portraits and various things they had of the lineage, the long lineage of emperors over the Roman Empire. Now, last night, if you didn't catch it, it's in the archive. I went through 5 of those emperors that Revelation 17 mentions as the 5 of 7 kings that are fallen. And then we talked about the 6th king who revived, the 6th head of the Holy Roman Empire that revived the Holy Roman Empire between 1936 and 1945, that being Mussolini, and how that came about, and how Revelation 17 prophesies that there will be a total of 7. And it says 5 are fallen and 1 is. Now that put that verse in Revelation 17:10 timed from the time when the Apostle John wrote it on the Isle of Patmos back in his days around 70, 80, 90 AD, about the time he wrote that. That made that verse in future present tense, future perfect, future present tense to 1936 to 1945. So that those reading the verse at that point in time, when they read 1 is, they say, and 5 are fallen, and it's easy to figure out who. Many commentaries, many people know who the 5 who are fallen are. That's easy to pencil out from historical books. But then that 6th one that this Revelation 17:10 says 1 is, that happened for a short space of time between 1936 and 1945, and God revealed to a man who was alive then at age 43 who the truth of this prophecy, to show him that, as Mussolini claimed in the newspapers, he had revived the Holy Roman Empire. That made him the 6th head of the Holy Roman Empire. I put the chart up on the screen last night. Gonna make us go overtime again tonight, friends. But here, let me just pop this on the screen for you for a moment. Go to the bottom part of this, way down to the bottom part of this, where we've got on one side of this, let's see, let's get the one with the pictures. I can't see the buttons I'm hitting, just the top edge of them, so let me just, hopefully that slide is convenient here. I had this ready for us last night and put this up on the screen, and I'm just going to ask you to go back to last night's program. Well, rather than go through this again tonight, friends, I'm going to just ask you to go to last night's program to get the details. I just did that last night on those 5 kings, the 6th one being Mussolini. We don't know who the next one is yet, but we know it's likely coming pretty soon, the way we see United Europe coming together, and what can very quickly develop into 10 regions by a remapping, redistribution of the members of the EU, so that there's 5 from the east and 5 from the west. And once they revive that, in that 5th seal, several things will happen. We're told in prophecy will happen here. It'll be the time of the round 3 of World War. It'll be the time of a martyrdom of God's saints, a great martyrdom, much bigger than has ever happened before. The time of Jacob's trouble that Jesus Christ described, a time so bad that since the beginning of the world, no time has ever been as bad as what will be during the time of Jacob's trouble during this great tribulation, and no time after this will ever be as bad, thankfully. And that's the next major event in prophecy. These first 4 seals, they've been happening. I've been going over those with you a lot in the past several days and weeks. But the question is, does the naming of this new jet, military jet, as a Scorpion, does it have anything to do with this prophecy? Is it kind of to shake us, friends, into a focus on Revelation 9 that talks about military aircraft, jet aircraft, as a scorpion. I mean, that's what it's saying there. Let's go through the verses. Let's pull this forward. I'll go through as we close up tonight. I'll go through these quickly. The first 11, 12 verses of Revelation 9. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Verse 2, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And verse 3, there came out of the smoke locust upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. Now what does he mean by that? Let's go on. You'll get a further picture of this as we get into the next few verses here in Revelation 9. And verse 4, it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And verse 5, to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion, when it strikes a man. And verse 6, in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. I'll show you in a moment from a chart how that's talking about the time during the day of the Lord. That's part of the first woe, part of the fifth trumpet during the days of the Lord. But going on just a few more verses here in Revelation 9 and verse 7, the shapes of the locust were like unto horses prepared unto battle. Here we have a military scene being described at a time when the servant of God who was writing this, the Apostle John, on the Isle of Patmos, circa sometime around 90 A.D., at that time they didn't have modern military machinery as we have it today, with tanks, big metal tanks, and they didn't have aircraft. They didn't have jet aircraft then. So the military weaponry that God was causing John to see in a vision, he had to describe in terms that people of his day were able to recognize and understand. He described it with what he could best come up with words as horses, like prepared unto battle. That's describing military thing. Now today, instead of horses, we're going to see armed tanks and jet aircraft and missiles and all that kind of thing. All right, let's go on. Let's keep this verse on the screen. We'll go on with the rest of this verse. And on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. So it's describing military men. And verse 8, they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And verse 9, they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. The sound of modern aircraft, military aircraft, is like he's describing it here, is the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. So John's doing the best he can to describe the modern day military aircraft and battlement weaponry of the last days as he could in 90 A.D. when they didn't have such things then. And verse 10, they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. As God gave us a good explanation of this through Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, friends, years ago, God's apostle for these end times, and even though he died in 1986, his words are well preserved, live on in recordings and publications, as if he was speaking from the grave, and he explained to us, God gave this understanding to us through Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, that what's being described here in verse 10, the tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, is like the bombs and missiles attached to military jet aircraft. And then one or two more verses here, and I know we're running a little longer tonight, and I'm going to try to wrap it up here quickly. And verse 11, they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. And friends, that, in short and sweet, that is the god of this world, that old serpent, that dragon that deceives, as Revelation 12:9 says. We've cited that verse here many a time, and you find it right here in your Bible. It says that old serpent, that dragon, the Satan and devil, a devil named Satan, who deceiveth the whole world. And that's the one this verse is describing, as it says they had a king over them, which is the angel. And as you know, 2 Corinthians, I think it's verse 11-14, talks about that being transforming himself as an angel of light. And yet he's not really an angel of light. I think I can go very quickly to that verse. Let's just hit that real quickly, and then I'll finish with verse 12. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, for verse 13, starting verse 13, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And verse 14, no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light, that one who deceiveth the whole world. Everybody think, oh yeah, we're worshiping a great God, when in fact they're worshiping the god of this world, Satan the devil, who is greatly associated with Baal, the sun god. That video we had last night about the hailstones coming down on that beach in Russia, as people were, as they reported it in the news, I thought, what a great way the news reporter worded it when he said the hailstones came down on the sun worshippers there at the beach. I thought, very well spoken, very well said by that reporter. Verse 12, it says, describing, summarizing it's just described here in verses 1 through 11. One woe is past, and behold, there come two more woes hereafter. Now, if we go, friends, to a slide that I have that, well, in fact, it's this slide. If we just bring it out full, I just messed up my camera. So I think I've got a button over here I can do this with. Oh, not that button. Sign us off.
You have been watching.
I know it's sign-off time, but here we go. Sorry for goofing us up tonight, friends, but if we go to this button, you know, we do a live program, friends, and I could sure use somebody, an assistant who runs the controls while I try to talk to you live. I used to run the controls for the initial host of this program, and he could just freely talk to you, and I could make sure all the camera shots were working correctly. But you're a little more on the hot seat when, especially things, computers, things can easily go wrong with computers, unfortunately. But I think I can find, if you'll just bear with me a moment. I know we're going over, but I think I can find where I want to pull this slide out to an area on this slide where I was telling you one woe is past. I've got, well, actually, here it is. I got it right here. On this slide, over on the right side of this slide is the seventh seal of Revelation, where the seventh seal is composed of 7 trumpets. The 5th trumpet, and I think I got a slide over here. We can go to this. Let me come back out of that. I'm going to take you to a close-up area of this slide I was just showing you that I prepared ahead of time, where we zoom right in on the area I want to focus on. The 5 you see at the top on the left side, that means the 5th trumpet. of the 5 trumpets of the 7th seal. And you'll see the one underneath it. That 5th trumpet is the same as the first of 3 woes. And these 11 verses we were reading to you from Revelation 9 are describing the first woe. So I wanted you to see and understand from this chart that that's where we are in timing on this chart. It's all 6 seals have passed, the sun, moon, and we've had the heavenly signs, the sealing of the 144,000. The 7th seal has started. The first 4 trumpets have blown, and now the 5th trumpet. When it blows, the first woe begins, and that first woe was being described in those first 11 verses of Revelation 9 that I just was reading to you there. And that 12th verse, as it said, one woe is past, and behold, come 2 more woes hereafter. So as you can see on this next slide, the first woe, once it's passed, there's the second woe to come, and then the third woe. And after the second woe, the 2 witnesses who have been prophesying all through the Great Tribulation, and then the Day of the Lord, which is the Great Tribulation, about a 2.5-year period, and then the Day of the Lord, about a 1-year period. And then they're killed in Jerusalem and are on the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. And then as Jesus Christ returns at the beginning of the 3rd seal, those 2 witnesses are raised up into the air and they rise up to meet him. And then those who remain alive on the face of this earth, they get to go up after those who were dead. And those 2 witnesses were dead for 3.5 days. So the 2 witnesses go up with all those who died in Christ. And maybe, as it's saying it here, maybe God's going to bring those 2 witnesses up first, and then bring up the ones in the grave, and then bring up those who remain alive next. But hopefully those of you who are alive, who are watching this program, are some who've been a part of a calling that thankfully God called me to some years ago, who understand what God is saying in Luke 21, verse 36, where if you continue to watch world news every day and put your heart into prayer about the things you see, and have a Philadelphia attitude all the way unto the point when the 5th seal begins, that also commences another era in the Church of God, an era that is hallmarked by martyrdom. That's one of the predominant elements of that next era to come, martyrdom. That martyrdom, thankfully, hasn't started yet in the way it's going to be. I know there are people professing Christian in the world who are being killed by terrorist types of people, but this is going to be a religious thing worldwide where there's going to be a new blue sky law that is going to require people to work on the Sabbath and to bow down and worship the image of a beast, and those who don't will be martyred. Big time, big scale martyrdom. That's the predominant thing of the next era. And those who keep a Philadelphia attitude all the way up to that point can be accounted worthy, as Christ said in Luke 21:36. And I think it's important for some of you who are watching this that I emphasize that. We'll end on this. I'll just turn real quickly to Luke 21 and verse 36, and we'll just read that, and then I'll close for tonight, where Christ is saying, "Watch you therefore and pray always." And he's saying therefore because he's just been describing the first 4 seals of Revelation, which Jesus Christ described in plain language in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and in Luke 21 up to this verse 36. He's saying, "Watch you therefore." When you see all these things come to pass, represented by the first seal of great religious deception, the second seal of war and world wars, which began just last century, which getting us further into these seals, he said, when you see all these things happen and accelerate, know that the next seal, the 5th seal, is at the door, and then Christ is on the way. The red seal of war, rumors of world war, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famine, the 3rd seal of the black horse, and the 4th seal a combination of three things, mainly disease epidemics and pestilence, which Christ described as loimus. He also described characteristics, actualities, events between the third seal and the fifth seal as being seismus, seismic activity, which the Greek English lexicons describe as commotions in the air, gale force, winds of all kinds, and commotions on the ground. And the example given is such as earthquakes. And that's the only part of that Greek word seismus that the King James language decided to pick up on was earthquakes. It left out the gale force winds, but that's part of it. And a third part of that Jesus Christ described in Mark 13, verse 8 was terake, trouble. Troubled waters, literally and figuratively, such as mobs and seditions, and trouble that leads up to but is not yet the mega trouble of the fifth seal, the great tribulation of the fifth seal. But trouble. And we see trouble building, and we see all kind of diverse earthquakes and gale force wind activity and typhoons and flooding and all the kind of things of the fourth seal, and disease epidemics. In the third seal, we see drought, which is going to lead to famine. Next major event in prophecy, the fifth seal. And Christ is saying that these events that lead up to this fifth seal, that lead up to great tribulation, you can escape it if you're doing what he says do in verse 36 of Luke 21. Watch you, therefore. When you see all these things accelerating, especially watch. When you see the religious deception, the wars, our news night after night is full of war activity. And drought, news of drought, the third seal, and news of disease epidemics, and especially the part of the fourth seal that Christ described as seismus. Diverse, different seismic activity in different places all over the earth. And typhoons, hurricanes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, flooding, wildfires, earthquakes, yes. The daily earthquakes are sign up with an earthquake alert thing, and it's going to be like a news ticker. It's just going to be nonstop. Earthquake here, earthquake there, all over the place. Friends, if you can't see that we're right at the door of the fifth seal of the Great Tribulation, and if you're not doing what Christ said here, you're not going to be counted worthy. You're not going to be accounted worthy to escape it. But he says, if you do them, let's turn it in the positive way. Watch you, therefore, and pray always. Be an active part of the day's world news, praying always. Then, here's the promise, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things. Now, this weekend, I'm planning to go through some information and try to find some broadcast or sermons by Mr. Armstrong related to the place where God will take those who are counted worthy. I'll be doing that on a different channel. Those of you who are aware of what we do on the weekend and where we do it, I'll be doing that on a different channel. I may mention that later in the week, but we got to sign off. I'm gone way over tonight. Friends, thank you for joining me. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Wednesday night, for our next edition of the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy right here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.